Hi, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to All Things Policy. China has grown rapidly over the last few decades. However, the experience of China it challenges many policy intuitions. For instance, China has been able to grow at this massive rate without having liberal political institutions. The role of the state has been immense, but at the same time, it has been able to harness the markets. Apart from that, it has tried different kinds of experiments. In this episode, we are going to discuss China's growth trajectory, but at the same time, what have been some of the underlying tensions, what have been some of the issues, what have been some of the challenges. To discuss this with me, I have my colleague Amit. Amit is a staff research analyst at Takshashila's Indo-Pacific Studies program. He watches China keenly, and at the same time, he teaches. In fact, he has designed a short capsule program, 4-week program on China and China's position in the changing geo-economic order. Hi Amit, welcome to All Things Policy.
Thank you so much, Sarthak. Glad to be here.
So Amit, before we start, I just want you to let us know what is the governance structure in China? What are the different levels of government? How are the responsibilities assigned between the levels of government? How does it achieve what it is supposed to achieve?
Okay, Sarthak. So it's a great question to I think start the podcast with. I think if you ask people who watch China or people who have some understanding of China, and if you ask them how is China governed or what is the governance structure in China, uh, most will tell you that it's a centralized uh, planned economy, centralized governance structure, top-down, heavy uh, governance structure. And that's true. How if you get reminded of the times during Mao, etc., and even now Xi Jinping, the central leadership is quite powerful. So the answer that you would get more often would be that China is a centralized uh, polity, right? But lately, we have also heard that one of the factors that drove China's successes was that it's a decentralized polity, and largely decentralization was one of the driving factors that got China to a position where it is today. Because there's a lot of competition between uh, at the municipality level, at the provincial level, etc. Right, and people have often pointed to figures such as that local governments spend most of the national budgetary expenditure, right? To be precise, 85% of the national general budgetary expenditure. So that gives you a sense of that China is a decentralized polity. But so how do you make sense of this, right? Uh, so neither is incorrect. Both are correct in a way. Uh, so I think the I think what we need to understand is China is a very centralized economy, and yet it manages to mobilize the decentralized spirits in order to uh, get to what it desires, right? And I think when it comes to levels of government, I think there are 5 levels of government: the central leadership, the central government. Then you have provinces. Below the provinces, you have prefectures level municipalities. Then you have counties, and then you have townships. One thing about the governments and all levels of governments, and here when you refer to local governments, in case of China, local governments combine or are inclusive of all governments except for the central leadership, the central government, that is provinces, municipalities, county, and townships. So local government, in general, in China's case, the term refers to all these governments, all these levels of government. And in China, all levels of governments are general purpose government. So they carry out all sorts of activities. There's no such thing as this is something. I mean, yes, like security and social security, etc., would be something that the provinces and the municipalities level of the government would take care of. But there's no such hard divisions. So they're all general purpose governments. They do all things: socio-economic development, implementation, etc. Everything is done.
Just one quick question. For instance, in India, the union has certain responsibilities, the state has certain responsibilities,
Right.
and then the local bodies again have certain responsibilities which is decided by the state. You
Yeah.
don't have those kind of clear demarcations in the Chinese polity.
you won't have such clear dimensions. Like we have three different
Hmm.
lists, and
Yeah.
each of the the states are sovereign in those matters.
Yeah.
Their say is final. Then you have union list where the final say is with the union government. And then they have concurrent list
Yeah.
where both can legislate. And if there's a difference between the two governments, the union law prevails. Right? There's no such structure in China. Right? Now, coming on to how things are divided. So things are governed, and uh, how do you explain the centralized polity with uh, some form of decentralization? So there's a famous quote by uh, China's first uh, leader, Mao Zedong, and he said that he defined, in fact, China's polity as dual initiative, if I'm not wrong. What it essentially meant was that it combines the best of central authority and local dynamism. Although it was in practice back at the time, but over the period of time, I think this is something, especially uh, during Deng Xiaoping's era, this crystallized, and then we have seen further how this model has developed. So what it essentially happens is, again, unlike India, where the both the union and the state level of the government legislate and deliberate on issues. In China, most of the deliberations about national and strategic priorities, they happen at the highest level of the government. That is at the central level. And these happen consistently in Politburo meetings, study sessions, uh, in central committee. I mean, the decision is taken above the central committee level through these various study sessions or Politburo meeting sessions. Now, of course, there are inputs from below, but largely these questions as to what China's national priorities are, strategic objectives are, where we need to invest, etc., and what should be our focus in terms of industrialization, etc., key economic sectors. These and leading small groups, right? These are the areas where these are the platforms where these questions are deliberated, and these eventually then come out in the form of 5-year plans every 5 years at the NPC session in March. Every 5 years, okay. Although the NPC session happens every year, but every 5 years you would also have 5-year plans that are unveiled by the central leadership. The recommendations to the 15th final 5-year plan was just unveiled in late October last year, and most of the recommendations will make it to the final 15th 5-year draft, which will see unveiled in March 2026. Right. So this is where the national priorities are then outlined by the central leadership, and then once that is done, you have successive and levels of the governments, the provinces, municipalities, counties, etc., and so on and so forth. They'll have their respective 5-year plans that will come up with, and largely abiding and staying within the limits of what the central leadership has already outlined. So this is what their governance structure looks like, and how they govern issues.
So, again, when you are saying that the priorities are set at the central level, and again, the other levels of government, they are all trying to ensure that whatever plans they're coming up with, it aligns with that. So, how is this coordination happening? Like, so throughout the length and breadth of the country, right? They are doing these kind of coordinations, and also since the priorities are being set at the top, right? I'm assuming some technocrat is doing that. I would assume that it is very difficult to get the priorities correct, doing all these estimates correct, right? There will be some shortages, there will be excesses at some point of time. So how does all these things happen? What has been the performance? And again, one associated question I keep, my feed is always full of different kinds of videos where China has built some impressive infrastructure in some far off places, right? So there is this notion that China gets things done, right? So how does it happen? Right, priorities might be set at some level, but again, how does it percolate? Who ensures that these things are taken into consideration, that these local level plans align with the priorities?
That's a great question, and I think yes, and I think this is a two-part question. Answering your first question, how it percolates down the levels of different levels of government, even though the priority is set right at the top. What is it that makes the local governments cater to the party line? So the answer to the question is basically how the incentive structure in China's system is again structured, right, and how it is designed. So there's a carrot and stick policy, I would say, right. So what it happens, there's a parallel governance, unlike many of the systems of governments that is in practice, including if you say in India. This one structure of the government, like you have at the central level, you have the government, you have a provincial government, state governments, etc. In China, you have a parallel structure of governance. There's a state machinery and there's a party machinery. At the top, you would must have heard that when you speak of Xi Jinping, so he is often introduced as general secretary
Yeah.
and president.
Okay.
So he holds those two positions. He leads the country in his capacity as the president of the country, but he also leads the party there, the general secretary, topmost position, right? But and this is a parallel, dual position that he holds. But this is not something which is followed down to the last level of the governance. At every successive level, you have state machinery where a governor leads the province, mayor leads the municipalities, prefectures, and then you have again and different by different under different names, leaders at county level and the townships. But what also happens in China is that you have a parallel structure, and wherein one party secretary is appointed at each level of the government. So you have a party secretary at the provincial level of governance. You have then party secretary that is also appointed again at the prefecture level municipalities, and then so on and so forth. And these all these appointments are done by the preceding higher authority called the party committee. So central party committee would appoint the party secretary at the provincial level. Provincial party committee will appoint it at the level of the municipality, and so on and so forth, right. Now what happens is and these two so at the provincial level you have two leaders, just not one leader. You have the governor, you have the party secretary. Again at the municipality level you have the mayor and the party secretary, and these two people co-govern the entire whatever their jurisdiction. And the final say often relies with the party secretary,
Okay.
not with the.
So the party dominates over
the party governments. And even though the division of responsibility is such that the mayor or the state machinery is responsible for all sorts of implementation of policies, etc., all sorts of government activities, bureaucracy, etc. The party secretary, the party machinery, is just to oversee an alignment, whether the person, the leader, is not straying too far from the party line, and to ensure that the overall policies of that particular jurisdiction is in total alignment with the central guidelines or the central narrative that is being. Okay. And now, how do they implement it? So this vertical feedback mechanism. So every now and then, on a periodic level, these party secretaries submit a report to their higher ups, outlining whether the whatever the level of governance is aligned to the party lines or not. Okay. And this then and the cadre promotions that happens, the promotion ladder, it is based on these performance reports that are sent on a periodic basis to their higher ups. And this is how the entire chain builds up. And the central government, central leadership keeps a tab on the subsequent levels of the government. Now, if that is not enough, even now this is carrot, right? Promotion, promoting, you'll get promotion if you adhere to the party line. If you don't, then you have disciplinary actions that are taken against you. And this is something which has been in how China is governed, but this is something which is solidified under Xi's leadership. Ever since he has taken office, about more than a few million people have been prosecuted, investigated, etc. And mostly on the charges of corruption, but also because they failed on the disciplinary account because they did not adhere to the party line. And that's promotion. I mean, you can still live without promotion. Yeah. But if you get expelled from the party, etc., there are harsher punishments. And within Xi, people down to the toe, they just adhere to the party line. Now, this explains the horizontal push or pull, however you may want to define it. There's also this is vertical. This is also horizontal push or pull. I mean, yes, you have to align with the party views and guidelines, etc., and it will ensure that you are not expelled from the party or you are promoted through the promotion ladder. But what you realize, and in China, what happens is municipality is largely the focal center of development and governance. Not even provinces, but municipalities, right? And there are about over 330 prefecture level municipalities that are operating in China. And each mayor is in competition with their peers, right? So you just don't have to adhere to the party lines, the party's central guidelines and priorities, etc. in West, but you also have to outcompete them in order to, look better. If you don't look better against them, then again there are disciplinary actions.
Okay.
So this is a horizontal push, there's a vertical push, and this is how the government maintains political oversight of local governments and ensures that that they adhere to the party line.
And can someone start from the beginning at the local level and rise up? Does it happen?
See, mostly, I mean, you'll hear different accounts, but unless you have political connections, and in China's case, it might also always mean princelings. So princelings are someone who have had princelings are those categories who belong to a category of politicians who have had their previous generations at the very top positions, etc.
Okay.
Xi Jinping is a princeling.
Okay.
His father was a top party leader, right? Even served as vice president, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, it's difficult, and obviously, you can rise through the ranks, but that can only take you so far. Of course, there are exceptions, but you need to have those sort of connections that you build over time, and especially it helps if you're a princeling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one associated question. Now, again, you did mention how there is competition, and most likely because of the competition and also the adherence to the party line, you are able to achieve some of the national priorities. But for any governance structure to be successful, right, it needs some form of legitimacy. Right? In case of China, how do the citizens participate in the governance process, in the political process? Can an average person be part of that process? In fact, this is related to the previous question. Not just about rising up, but can you participate, right? Can your do these national priorities or whatever priorities they identify, do they take into consideration the public priorities?
See, to that same question, I think I missed out on another point was that factionism in China. I mean, now it's difficult, but earlier there were two competing factions within the Chinese Communist Party, right? Communist Party of China, and so if you become part of that faction, depending upon which is dominating, which is not, the Youth League, the Youth League faction, CYL League. I think from where Hu Jintao rose to power, he was a communist. So there are factions, right? And depending on which faction is dominating, that could also determine how successful you are in rising through the ranks. Now, coming on to the question of how people participate, yes, people do participate. Unlike like most of what we think. I mean, not in the way that people in the US or maybe you say in India participate. But yes, there are protests. There are ways in which people express their disappointment. But largely, these disappointments are also directed at the local level governments or their offices, extended offices. I mean, there could be a company which is like public sector banks, right? And we saw these last year when a lot of people protested against some government public sector banks because some salaries were not paid and they were not sure if the deposits are all right, etc. So protests do happen and people can express their anger, but in most cases and in almost all cases, these are not directed against the central leadership. And the central leadership is also in that way is very smart. The protest takes against the local level they get suspended or some actions taken against them, and it kind of works as a pressure cooker system, a safety valve where you allow that thing to pressure to ease.
See, one of the things that is quite noticeable is how much China invests, right? Invests in different kinds of infrastructure. Now, I'll come to the infrastructure part. It's the investment model that it follows. But before that, how does China raise revenue? Right? You mentioned about the different levels of government. So, which level of government is primarily responsible for raising revenue? And again, how much taxes does it raise? Does it also prioritize non-taxes? And also, are there any guardrails for fiscal discipline, budgetary discipline?
Okay, so again, this allows me to go back to the second question that you asked. How do the central government keep tabs on the local governments and the fiscal discipline, especially that we have heard a lot about how the local government debt is becoming a problem, right? So I think fiscal relations again is one of the other factors apart from that promotion structure that we just talked about, is how they control or keep tabs on the local government. So if you look at the history before 1994, how taxes, the revenues were shared between the two levels of the government, the central and the local, was through a what you can describe it as fiscal contractual system, wherein the local governments and the central government negotiated a revenue share, and that is how it was done. But over a period of time, what happened was that the central government realized that we have lost complete control over the fiscal revenue, and that also in some way prevents you from controlling the local governments, right? So in 1994, a new tax sharing system was brought in place, and what it did was, and before this new revenue system, and this completely changed the balance or the imbalance, fiscal imbalance that existed in the center and the local government. Before this new tax sharing system came into place, China's share of tax and non-tax revenue in the national share was somewhere around 22%.
Okay.
And most of it was being taken up by the local governments, about 78%, right? When the new tax sharing system came into place in 1994, the next year this number changed and it surged. Central government's tax and non-tax revenue surged from 22% to 46%.
Okay.
And that was a complete change. Now, even here, and what this would mean, and what you, as I initially mentioned, right? The local governments are still responsible for most of the expenditure. So you'll have to do those central transfers, right? Yeah. Because they'll not be able to. But this is, in practice, even now, the central government, transfers, it pays about 93% of its revenue that it raises to the local governments. Okay. But here, the catch is that this distribution is not equitable. Okay. This redistribution of transfers is not equitable. So I think the biggest chunk of this is provided as equalization fee, because there are regional disparities, regional imbalances. Some states would not be that prosperous, especially towards the west and the central area, right? The east and the southeast are the ones which are the most prosperous. Yeah. So you would have some equalization fee or equalization transfers that are paid to some. Now, if you move that out, if you take that out, the largest chunk, I think, is paid in tax and subsidies. Now, again, subsidies will be paid to those particular local governments, because they are central government subsidies, they'll be aligned to what the central priorities are. So, in case you want money, you have to align with the central government priorities. Now, the next thing is taxes. Taxes again makes for the largest chunk of these transfers.
Tax revenue.
Tax revenue, yeah. Now, in tax for the local governments, the biggest source of tax income is VAT. Okay. Value-added tax, and the system in China is such that the central government is the collector of the taxes. The VAT, the central government collects it, and it keeps 50% with itself. The rest 50% is again dispersed. Again, this dispersal is not a equitable distribution, which is.
But that's fine in the sense, right? The cities which create conducive conditions for growth.
Exactly.
There will be more consumption, and again, they will be able to
Exactly.
raise more VAT, and they're getting a larger share.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, that it incentivizes. Now, in China's case, VAT is a production based tax, not a
Okay.
consumption based tax. That is, it is given to the government where production actually took place and not where the product was consumed.
Okay.
So now what this does is that it incentivizes production, right? It incentivizes and this is because the major source of tax, every government would want to prioritize investments and production. They do not care about whether they are profitable or not. And this is how you come to the question of overcapacity and why so much of investment, why every
in fact that was my next question. I was going to ask you about what is the China model, right? The
exactly.
investment led export oriented model.
Yes.
Yeah. So in fact, it would be better if you could talk about that and then move to
I think this question, like I'm done with this question, but yeah, on answering your the China model question again, people describe it as investment led, export led model, right? And how it manages to do so, and there's a reason why it's called an investment led, export oriented model of growth. I think we need to take two steps backward to actually look at how this all aligns in China's case. So I think the starting point for me, if I have to look, would be China's savings rates, because I think everything flows from there, right? So in China, the savings rates are Martin Wolf, I think, describes China as a global savings superpower. And that's there's a reason why he says so, right? In most of the columns and for Financial Times, he would very often refer to China as global savings superpower. So if you look at the global average of savings rates, national savings rates, I think if I'm not wrong, the global average is somewhere around 28% or something, right? Or 26% if I'm correct. China's case, that has been extremely high, to the tune of 40. If you look at the last 20-25 years of take out last 25 years of average, since from 2001, China's average savings rate has been about 43 to 45% of its. And now you put that into perspective with how big the Chinese economy is. That is massive. So if 40, and largely in most of the economies, you would see that there's a proportional relationship between savings and then investments, right? There are most of the countries where investments is higher than savings, but then in China's case, it's quite easy. If you have this large chunk of savings, I think last year itself, I think there's news that the Chinese banks are sitting on household savings deposits of about $23 trillion, right? That's massive. So this is quite high, and what the logical corollary of this is that if you have high in China, at least in China's case, the investment rates in the economy has largely tracked the rise in, or the trend in China's savings rate, right? At its peak, I think China's savings rate was about 52% in 2008-9. But yeah, if you look at largely the trend, how China has invested in its economy, investment as one of the three drivers. If you take investment, consumption, and exports as the three components of GDP, investment has contributed over 42% to its economy, and that's again another anomaly in the world. If you see, the global average is again around 25-30, between 25-30%. But China has sustained this investment rate of over 40%. It has not dropped. Even if you take, if you move out inventories and other things, the gross fiscal capital formation has been like tracking the total investment rate. So in China's case, that has happened, and that's how China manages to churn out this much capital. And over a period of time, and only two countries or three countries have come close to replicating China's numbers for a very brief period of time. I think if I have to remember correctly, it's Singapore, South Korea. They were both before 2003 or 4, and lastly India. I think between 2004 to 2014, where India touched about 40% something. So this is how, and now what this does is, uh, why export oriented, because savings in macroeconomics,
Correct.
you must know, savings minus investments is equal to exports minus imports, the current account. And this is how because they have this much of savings, and it is savings that is in excess of the investments. You'll have a current account surplus, and therefore exports oriented. And last year, I think China almost touched $1 trillion in trade surplus. This year, by November, already they have touched $1 trillion, and by December, they'll have this. They would have around $1.2 trillion of
Just
surplus.
one quick question, right, related to the savings. Why? What are there some internal policies because of which the savings is quite high?
Yes. So economists refer to it as financial repression.
Huh.
So largely policies are made in a way that it forces their citizens to save and save in banks, right? And why it happens is because social security measures, for the very good part of China's history, and especially from 1980s and so, they have not been great social security measures. And even the bank rates have been low, so you would think that it's counterintuitive, why are people saving if the interest rates are so low. But because the social security measures have been so bad, and because of the whole hukou system, uh, uh, if you're a migrant, and most in China, in most of these eastern provinces, people would migrate to other provinces, right? And once you migrate, so there's a hukou system in China. So it's a residence where you're registered, and if you migrate to some other province or some other region, you do not get those benefits. And one of those, based on hukou, one of the benefits that you get is your social security. So in most of the cases, you will be kept out of the social security net, etc. So the only way for you to have some social security after once you retire would be to have enough savings in banks. And this is how you do it. And also then there are other macroeconomic factors wherein the profits largely, or the income, the profits largely stay with, policies are designed in such a way that the profits stay with the corporates. It is not equally shared between households and corporates. So one of the things that economists keep talking about is that if you want the consumption to go on, the profit that the economy is making, that have to be shifted in a way that it is taken away from the corporates and then dispersed to the households so that they start consuming more. So this is how the whole policy of financial repression, which keeps savings high, and then these are then given out to the manufacturing or the production houses, where low cost loans. Then there are also manipulation with currency, etc. Then again, that's a discussion for a different podcast. But this is how they maintain these high
So the
levels of
state
investment.
has quite a large control over the entire economic system.
Yeah, totally. And how it is I don't know whether it was by design that they came to realize that this is what they can do, or this was something which they planned initially and then they stumbled upon it. Because if you see, if you break down the Chinese economic history from Mao's era, during Mao's era, China was like any other economy. Consumptions were at 60%, investments are slow. And then during Tang Xiaoping's period, you saw some numbers falling down, but still it was uh, investments were not at 40%, or about 30-35%. Consumption was still about 50% of GDP. But it all changed after 2001, when China acceded to the WTO trading regime. And part of it must have been deliberate. Part of it was a gradual, journey towards where China is today.
Yeah. So one last question. It's related to talent.
Yeah.
Right. So again, there are two aspects here. One is the domestic talent, right? So China's own people. So what has been its policy to improve the quality of its human capital?
Yeah.
Right. The second thing is, uh, there is Chinese talent world over, right? Many of the US universities, you have researchers, and not just universities, outside also. We keep on hearing that China has been trying to attract its talent from outside. Like for instance, the Thousand Talents program and all.
Yeah.
So how successful has it been in all these things? And also, uh, does China also have expats in its cities? Is it attractive enough for, let's say, a foreigner who is expert in something to shift base to China?
I think very much. So again, to bring more focus to this question, I think the one question that you asked introduction, that what explains China, how is it that China has been able to and do this much, where you're uh, in awe, and then you're also like kind of depressed and kind of anxious that this is what we're competing with, this is the country whether we're competing in. And the three reasons that I think that we have talked about today is the governance structure, and how the economic model again reinforces that structure, and churn out that much of capital that you have. Third, and you need another variable, and another uh, uh, consistent variable for China to be able to do that, right? And that is its workforce or the talent. Talent again is quite narrow. I would say if you talk when you talk of talent, talent is a narrower description of the larger workforce that works in China, right? But let's divide this into two components. The talent, when we say talent, we mean the very top of the
Yeah.
the cream of the workforce,
I
right?
didn't want to use the term labor force,
Yeah.
so I use the term
Yeah.
talent.
Yeah. So I think they're both equally important. Again, talent itself is a part of the workforce. So we'll both address this question separately. So if you look at China's workforce, it's somewhere around 607 million people in the workforce, of which about 200 million is highly skilled. Now, if you look at manufacturing, I think again the number is somewhere around 200 million or slightly less than that, is what China's workforce in manufacturing is. And there was a book that came out uh, last year, Apple in China, right, by Patrick McGee.
Yes.
And I think that uh, kind of describes how China has been able to achieve scale. In fact, scale if you have to have, if you want to achieve scale, and some scale is something that we all get surprised by how quickly and how easily China is manages to scale production, etc. And we saw the examples of it during the COVID, right? And how China does that, and it always surprises people how it manages to do that. One of my favorite examples, I think, in the past few months has been how both Xiaomi and Apple, they decided to venture into the EV sector. Both established phone companies, again in different sectors. Xiaomi and with not premium, doesn't have a premium product, but Apple completely a premium iPhone company. But they both decided to venture into the EV market. Apple finally gave up, and gave up on the plan. But Xiaomi built a car, an EV that made quite a lot of noise among and they have actually at this point of time they have actually the best one of the best EVs in the market, right? So how did it happen? And the answer to this is provided, I think, in part by what Patrick McGee argues in his book. And his largely focus is on Apple, and how Apple came, established its production houses. It did not outsource a lot of things, but what it did was, because it put up standard quality standards, etc. And it, over a period of time, it trained lakhs and millions of people, workforce in China, not in its own factory, but because it placed quality standards. And there was a proliferation of number of back-end supply chain companies that were then providing inputs to machinery and inputs to Apple. And they got trained, and Apple engineers would go in these different companies and train the workforce. So over a period of time, 20, 25, 30 years, Apple has trained a lot of millions of people in China. And this example, what Patrick McGee talks about, is largely focused on Apple. But you look at, there was Taiwanese company. There are a lot of Taiwanese companies that shifted their manufacturing base into China after around 1990s and 2000s. There were Japanese companies, South Korean, other European companies, and that uh, it has a multiplier effect. It has a spillover effect over economy. So over the last 4 decades, or three and a half decades, you have had very highly skilled, and this is highly skilled in the sense of the workforce, larger workforce that I'm talking about, who are working in manufacturing companies and manufacturing production, product production houses, etc. You have 200 million, about 200 million workforce that are highly skilled, and these skills are transferable, right? From one, it wouldn't take, because they are so skilled, it wouldn't take them much time to transition it from one industry to another, as it would take in any other country where you do not have that uh, uh, that kind of a spillover effect. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths that I think people have acknowledged it, but we need to acknowledge it more. That why is it that when a country starts, when any company starts, there's an example where a German company, Benz, that was an engineer which has a company, a company in base in China, I think. And again, there was some invention that came about, and it was an FT article, and the engineer was a German, and he talked about if this invention was to take place, we were trying to do this back in Germany, it would have taken us 30 years. But here, in just 3 years, our team has been able to achieve this thing.
That's
so
fascinating.
that tells you that there's a lot that we do not acknowledge about the Chinese workforce. I think it will take, and because you can have the US, EU, and India together, and you will still not have that larger skilled workforce that China has, because just in the economy, India's numbers are nowhere around manufacturing jobs. I think less than 60 million. If I'm not wrong, I'm not sure of the numbers, but this is what we are still at about half the number that China has. So that is one. The second part on talent, and largely the cream of the talent or the cream of the workforce. I think China has money, capital to spend, and there are people who have come back, and there are people who have come back from companies like ASML, TSMC, etc., Apple, etc., who have gone back because. Let's just say this: China has a lot of money, and it can give you that kind of a lifestyle that you can aspire for, except for the political freedom that if you're too hinged to the idea. If you're not, I think there is no harm, and people find it very easy to transition because of the perks and privileges that the Chinese government can give you, and the kind of labs that it can give you. And even in terms of academic talent, Chinese universities are doing great in the top 100 rankings. Uh, Again, 20, 25 years before, there were hardly 3 or 4 Chinese universities in the top 100. Now they have about 40 in the top 100, right? So they have the facilities,
and they have also been able to attract expats from outside.
right? Right.
Thank you, Amit, for the deep dive into the Chinese governance structure, the economy, and its ability to attract talent, skilled talent. Thanks to our listeners. We'll meet again in one more episode of All Things Policy. Thank you.